So I know that God thinks that suffering is real and it's not cheap. It's not incidental. It's not meaningless. It means something. And so God can do something with suffering because God did something with suffering. He saved the world. You know, a friend of mine, his mother had died when he was very, very young, when he was 10. We were talking about the problem of evil, and he was an atheist. And he said to me, you know, I have a hard time believing in this God, that he could be good and value me or my mother if he let her die when I was 10. You know, how do you answer such a question? I could rattle off the philosophers if I wanted to and talk about how the philosophers don't think that it's necessarily impossible for God to exist in a world where suffering exists, and we could go through all that. And we did, to be sure, do some of that. But here's the thing. Did you notice the question he asked? The question he asked was, how can I know that God is good and values my mother or me if he let her die? It's an important question. And philosophy has met reality. Now the rubber's met the road, and what do you do now? You know what's interesting is that I prayed really quick, and this came to me. And the Lord dropped this in to the conversation. He said, you know, you asked this question about God's goodness. And you know, we've already agreed, we had a long conversation, that God could allow suffering for a greater possible good. God could allow that. He could allow suffering for a greater possible good. And anybody who is a theist, someone who believes in God of some kind, whether it's Islam or Judaism or you name the different kind of theistic religions there are, anybody can say, yep, a God who knows everything and is powerful could allow suffering and evil for a greater possible good. That's at least possible. But for everybody else except the Christian, it's mere theory. It doesn't go beyond theory. It's just a theory. But can I tell you this? As a Christian, I can tell you that the idea that God could allow suffering to happen for a greater possible good goes beyond theory for the Christian, because for the Christian in history, God did allow suffering to happen to his own son for the greatest possible good there could possibly be, the salvation of the world. So the reason why I have confidence, though I will never fully understand why God allows someone to suffer in this life for some reason, I can know, I can have confidence that God allowed suffering in this world because he already did allow his own son. God the Father himself suffered when his son was forsaken. The Son himself suffered when he was forsaken. So I know that God thinks that suffering is real and it's not cheap. It's not incidental. It's not meaningless. It means something. And so God can do something with suffering because God did something with suffering. He saved the world. Then I asked this question of him. I said, you know, you asked me, how could I know that God values me or my mother? And I said, you know, how do you know anything has value? How do you know the value of anything? You know, if this universe is all there is and this physical life is all there is, then the only meaning you and I have is the meaning we give to each other. But I'm going to die one day, and I'm going to become fertilizer. And so will you. And so will everyone you've ever loved. And so we only have value in the blip sort of way, that you have value for a moment, and then that value doesn't mean anything. If my friend were an only child, and his mother had no other family, then when he dies, her value dies. How do you know you have objective value beyond human opinion? And he was desperately looking for that. He was desperately looking to see, how can my mother have value? Because his atheism had not given him an answer. And so I said, how do you know how valuable anything is? You know how valuable something is by what you're willing to pay for it. That's how you know how valuable a toaster is, by what you're willing to pay for it on the open market. How do you know how valuable a human being is? By what someone is willing to pay for that human being. And the one who created the entire universe, the objective source of all reality, paid an infinite price so that your mother and you can spend an infinite eternity with him. Your mother has an infinite value because the objective source of all reality demonstrated it at the cross. So the cross teaches us about the human condition and the paradox that we are, the dignity and the depraved. The cross teaches us about the reality of human value, and that there was a purpose behind that cross, and that purpose was to show us how infinitely valuable we actually are. And he gives us peace in dark times.